The year was 1916, deep into the quagmire of World War I, where the brutal stench of death and decay pervaded the air, and the incessant rumble of artillery became an unholy symphony. The Western Front, a stretch of war-torn land between France and Germany, was a desolate wasteland, scarred by trenches and craters. In the middle of this desolation lay the small French village of Beaumont-Hamel, now little more than a ghost town, reduced to ruins by the relentless shelling. Private Samuel Collins, a young soldier from Lancaster City, Pennsylvania, had been stationed in the trenches near Beaumont-Hamel for what felt like an eternity. The nights were cold, and the days were filled with the terror of sudden death from above or below. The only constant was the ever-present mud, clinging to their uniforms, their skin, their very souls. One night, under the cover of darkness and the eerie stillness that sometimes fell over the battlefield, Samuel and his comrades received orders for a reconnaissance mission. Their objective was to gather intelligence on the German positions just beyond no man's land. The mission was perilous, but not unusual. They had been on similar missions before. However, this night would be unlike any other. The small unit of soldiers, led by Sergeant O'Leary, crawled out of their trench and into the hellish expanse of no man's land. The air was thick with mist, and visibility was poor. As they advanced cautiously, the silence was punctuated only by the distant sounds of battle and the occasional flare lighting up the sky. They moved like shadows, careful to avoid the barbed wire and the shell holes that could easily become their graves. As they neared the German lines, the ground beneath them began to change. The mud grew thicker, darker, and colder. It seemed almost alive, as if it were trying to pull them down into its depths. Samuel felt an icy dread seep into his bones, but he pressed on, driven by duty and the desire to return home. Suddenly, they came across something unexpected, a large, yawning crater, far deeper and more ominous than any they had encountered before. Its edges were slick with a dark, oily substance that smelled of rot and decay. The sergeant signaled for them to investigate, sensing that this was no ordinary shell hole. As they approached the edge of the crater, they noticed something strange. The darkness within seemed to pulse, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a whispering wind. Peering over the edge, Samuel's heart nearly stopped. At the bottom of the crater, partially buried in the mud, was a structure. It looked ancient, far older than the war itself, with carvings and symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Sergeant O'Leary, ever the pragmatist, ordered them to descend. They needed to know what this was, and if it posed a threat. With ropes and sheer determination, they climbed down into the abyss. The air grew colder and more oppressive the deeper they went. The whispering sound grew louder, and Samuel realized it was not the wind, but voices, countless voices, speaking in a language he did not understand. At the bottom, they found an entrance to what seemed to be a crypt or a tomb. The carvings on the walls depicted nightmarish scenes of torment and suffering, and the symbols seemed to writhe and twist as they looked at them. A sense of dread filled the soldiers, but they pressed on, drawn by a morbid curiosity and the need to complete their mission. Inside the crypt, the air was thick with the stench of decay. The walls were lined with bones, and the floor was littered with skulls, their empty eye sockets staring accusingly. In the center of the room stood an altar, and on it lay a book bound in what looked like human skin. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices all speaking at once, filling their minds with madness. Sergeant O'Leary approached the altar, compelled by an unseen force. He reached out and touched the book, and in that instant, the crypt seemed to come alive. The walls shook, and the bones rattled. The whispers became screams. The ground beneath them split open, and from the darkness emerged twisted, nightmarish creatures, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The soldiers fought desperately, but their bullets seemed to have little effect on these abominations. One by one, they were dragged into the darkness, their screams echoing through the crypt. Samuel, in a last-ditch effort, grabbed the book from the altar and hurled it into the chasm. For a moment, the creatures paused, as if uncertain, and then they vanished, swallowed by the darkness from whence they came. Samuel, the sole survivor, clawed his way out of the crypt, his mind shattered by the horrors he had witnessed. He stumbled back to the trench, covered in mud and blood, babbling incoherently about the creatures and the cursed book. His comrades did not believe him, thinking he had lost his mind in the stress of battle. They sent him to the field hospital, where he was treated for shock and exhaustion. But Samuel knew the truth. He had seen the darkness that lay beneath the earth, an ancient evil that had been awakened by the violence of the war. He knew it was still out there, waiting, and that it would not rest until it had consumed everything. As he lay in his hospital bed, haunted by the whispers and the screams, he realized that the true horror of war was not just the death and destruction on the surface, but the ancient, malevolent forces it had unleashed from the depths below. The field hospital was a far cry from the chaos of the front lines, but for Samuel Collins, it offered little comfort. He could not escape the haunting visions and the echoing whispers that plagued his mind. His body trembled with a cold that seemed to come from within, and his eyes, once bright with youthful determination, now reflected the hollow, haunted look of a man who had stared into the abyss and seen it stare back. Days turned into weeks, and though his physical wounds began to heal, the psychological scars only deepened. The medical staff, sympathetic but ultimately skeptical, attributed his condition to shell shock, a common affliction among soldiers who had witnessed the horrors of the Great War. They treated him with rest, mild sedatives, and routine check UPS, hoping that time would mend what was broken. One night, as Samuel lay in his cot, the whispers returned, more insistent and malevolent than before. He sat up, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. The hospital ward was dark and silent, save for the occasional cough or murmur from the other patients. But Samuel could hear them, the voices from the crypt, calling to him, urging him to return. Unable to bear it any longer, Samuel slipped out of bed and crept through the dimly lit corridors. The whispers guided him, growing louder as he made his way to the hospital's exit. Outside, the moon cast an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. Samuel knew what he had to do. He had to go back to Beaumont Hamel, to the crypt, and confront the evil that had been unleashed. Stealing a supply truck, Samuel drove through the night, the whispers his constant companion. The journey was fraught with peril, as he navigated the war-torn roads, avoiding patrols and shell craters. By dawn, he had reached the outskirts of Beaumont Hamel, now a twisted ruin of its former self. The village was a ghostly tableau of shattered buildings and abandoned trenches, a silent witness to the carnage that had unfolded there. Samuel made his way to the crater, the memories of that fateful night flooding back with each step. The ground still bore the scars of their descent, and the oily substance still clung to the edges, a malevolent reminder of what lay below. With a deep breath, Samuel began his descent, once more entering the darkness. The crypt was as he remembered it, cold, oppressive, and filled with the stench of decay. The bones still lined the walls, and the altar stood ominously in the center of the room. But something was different. The book, the source of the whispers, was gone. In its place was a dark, gaping void, a portal to some otherworldly realm. As Samuel approached, the whispers became a deafening roar, and from the void emerged a figure. Tall and cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowed with an unholy light. The figure spoke, its voice a chilling amalgamation of all the whispers Samuel had heard. "You have returned, Samuel Collins," it intoned. "The darkness welcomes you." Samuel stood his ground, his fear mingled with a desperate resolve. "What are you?" he demanded. The figure seemed to smile, though its face remained hidden in the shadows. "I am that which was awakened by your war. I am the darkness that dwells beneath the earth, the ancient evil that feeds on death and despair. And now, you will serve me." Samuel felt a cold hand clutch his heart, and the world around him seemed to spin. He fell to his knees, the weight of the darkness pressing down on him. But in his mind, he saw the faces of his fallen comrades, the men who had fought and died in the trenches, and a spark of defiance flared within him. "No," he whispered, his voice gaining strength. "I will not serve you." The figure recoiled, its eyes blazing with anger. "You dare defy me?" Summoning every ounce of his willpower, Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small crucifix, a gift from his mother before he had left for the war. He held it up, its simple form gleaming in the dim light of the crypt. "In the name of all that is holy," Samuel cried, "I banish you back to the darkness." The figure screamed, a sound that reverberated through the crypt and shook the very foundations of the earth. The portal began to collapse, the shadows retreating into the void. Samuel felt a rush of cold air, and then the crypt was silent once more. Exhausted and trembling, Samuel climbed out of the crater, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. He had faced the darkness and survived, but he knew that the evil he had confronted was not truly defeated. It lay dormant, waiting for another chance to rise. As he made his way back to the field hospital, Samuel resolved to dedicate his life to ensuring that the horrors he had witnessed would never be forgotten. He would tell his story, warn others of the ancient evil that lurked beneath the surface, and remind the world that the true cost of war was not just the lives lost, but the darkness it could awaken. Years later, long after the war had ended, Samuel became a respected historian, writing extensively about the Great War and its hidden terrors. His accounts, though often dismissed as the ravings of a haunted mind, served as a chilling reminder that the horrors of the past were never truly gone. They merely waited, biding their time, until the world was once again ripe for darkness. Samuel Collins, now an old man, had dedicated his life to researching and documenting the hidden horrors of the Great War. His hair had turned silver, and deep lines etched his face, but his eyes still held the haunted look of a man who had seen beyond the veil of reality. Despite skepticism and dismissal by many, his books and lectures drew a small but devoted following, particularly among those who sensed there was more to the world than met the eye. In 1939, as the world once again teetered on the brink of war, Samuel received a letter that would change everything. The letter, written in a spidery, almost illegible hand, was from a fellow veteran named Harold Mason. Mason claimed to have experienced similar horrors during the war and had found something that might explain the ancient evil they had encountered. Intrigued and apprehensive, Samuel traveled to a remote village in the English countryside to meet Mason. The journey was long and fraught with uncertainty, but Samuel's determination pushed him forward. He arrived at Mason's home, an old, crumbling manor that seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. Mason greeted Samuel at the door. He was a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes and an air of quiet intensity. Despite the years, he moved with a nervous energy, as if constantly looking over his shoulder. He led Samuel to a dimly lit study, the walls lined with ancient tomes and curious artifacts. "I knew you'd come," Mason said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You've seen them too, haven't you? The creatures from the darkness." Samuel nodded, feeling a cold shiver run down his spine. "Yes." "What did you find, Harold?" Mason handed Samuel an old, leather-bound journal. This belonged to an archaeologist named Dr. Emmett Gray. He was investigating ancient ruins in Mesopotamia before the war. His notes, they detail something far older and more sinister than we could have imagined. Samuel opened the journal, his hands trembling. The pages were filled with meticulous drawings and descriptions of ancient sites, cryptic symbols, and references to dark rituals. Dr. Gray wrote of an ancient civilization that worshipped entities from beyond the stars, beings of immense power and malice. This civilization, Mason explained, was destroyed by its own creations. The entities they summoned were sealed away, buried deep beneath the earth. But the war, the death, and destruction weakened those seals. Samuel felt a sickening realization. The crypt in Beaumont Hamel, it was one of those seals. Mason nodded. Yes. And there are more. Scattered across the world, waiting to be awakened. As Samuel pored over the journal, a sense of dread settled over him. The war had not only been a human conflict but a catalyst for something far more dangerous. The ancient evil they had unwittingly released was stirring once more, and the approaching global conflict threatened to break the remaining seals. "We have to stop it," Samuel said, his voice resolute. "We have to find the seals and reinforce them, before it's too late." For the next several months, Samuel and Mason worked tirelessly, deciphering Dr. Gray's notes and planning their next moves. They identified several key locations where the seals were most vulnerable, from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the jungles of South America. Each location was marked by ancient ruins, cryptic symbols, and a pervasive sense of dread. Their first destination was a forgotten temple in the heart of the Mesopotamian desert. With the help of a few trusted allies, they navigated the war-torn region, evading both enemy forces and the ever-watchful eyes of those who sought to harness the ancient power for themselves. The journey was perilous, but Samuel's resolve never wavered. At the temple, they encountered more than just ancient stone and dust. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and as they delved deeper, they found evidence of recent activity. Someone had been there, tampering with the seal. The ancient symbols had been disturbed, and the sense of malevolence was palpable. Working quickly, Samuel and Mason performed the necessary rituals to restore the seal. It was a harrowing process, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they succeeded in stabilizing the ancient barrier. As they left the temple, Samuel felt a glimmer of hope. They had bought the world some time. Their next destination was the jungles of South America, where another ancient civilization had left its mark. The journey took them through dense, humid forests and treacherous terrain. They faced not only the dangers of the jungle but also the ever-present threat of discovery by those who would use the ancient power for their own ends. At the heart of the jungle, they found a hidden temple, its entrance obscured by vines and undergrowth. Inside, the air was thick with humidity and the smell of decay. The walls were covered in carvings depicting nightmarish scenes of sacrifice and summoning. As they approached the central chamber, they felt the oppressive energy grow stronger. In the chamber, they found the seal, a massive stone slab covered in intricate symbols. But they were not alone. A group of shadowy figures, led by a man with an aura of dark authority, stood before the seal. The man turned to face them, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Welcome, Samuel Collins," the man said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I've been expecting you." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you?" The man smiled, a cruel, predatory smile. I am the one who will unleash the darkness upon this world. The seals must be broken, and the Ancient Ones must rise again." A fierce battle ensued. Samuel and Mason fought valiantly, using their knowledge of the ancient symbols to combat the dark forces. The chamber shook with the intensity of their struggle, the very air crackling with energy. In the end, they managed to repel the dark figures and restore the seal, but the cost was high. Mason was gravely injured, his lifeblood seeping into the ancient stones. Samuel held him as he drew his last breath, promising to continue the fight. With a heavy heart, Samuel left the temple, his resolve stronger than ever. The darkness was rising, and the world was on the brink of another devastating war. Over the next few years, as World War II raged, Samuel continued his mission. He traveled from one ancient site to another, battling the forces of darkness and restoring the seals. Each victory came at a great cost, and Samuel grew weary, but he never gave up. He knew that the fate of the world depended on his efforts. In 1945, as the war came to an end, Samuel faced his greatest challenge yet. He had tracked the final seal to a remote island in the Pacific, where the remnants of the ancient civilization lay hidden beneath the waves. The journey was treacherous, and the island itself was shrouded in an aura of malevolence. Samuel, now an old man, felt the weight of his years and the toll of his battles. But he pressed on, determined to see his mission through to the end. He made his way to the heart of the island, where the final seal lay hidden in an underwater cavern. The cavern was filled with eerie, phosphorescent light, and the water was unnaturally cold. As he approached the seal, he was confronted by the same shadowy figure he had encountered in South America. The man's eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his voice echoed through the cavern. "Welcome, Samuel Collins," he said. "You have come far, but this is where your journey ends." Samuel stood tall, his eyes burning with determination. "I will not let you unleash the darkness." The man laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the cavern. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The seals will break, and the Ancient Ones will rise again." A final, desperate battle ensued. Samuel fought with all his strength, using the knowledge he had gained over the years to combat the dark forces. The cavern shook with the intensity of their struggle, the very water roiling with energy. In the end, Samuel managed to restore the final seal, but the cost was great. Exhausted and wounded, Samuel collapsed beside the seal. He had done it, he had saved the world from the ancient evil. But as he lay there, he knew that the fight was never truly over. The darkness would always be there, waiting for another chance to rise. With his last breath, Samuel whispered a prayer for the future, hoping that those who came after him would be ready to face the darkness when it returned. And as the light faded from his eyes, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had done all he could to protect the world from the ancient evil that lurked beneath the surface. Samuel Collins' legacy did not die with him. His journals, meticulously kept over the years, documented every dark encounter, every ancient ruin, and every ritual performed to keep the seals intact. These writings were passed down, finding their way into the hands of a secretive group dedicated to combating the malevolent forces lurking beneath the earth, the Order of the Lightbringers. As the world moved into the second half of the 20th century, the Order grew in numbers and influence. They recruited scholars, archaeologists, and former soldiers, all sworn to protect the world from the ancient evil Samuel had fought against. Among their ranks was a young woman named Eleanor Bishop, a historian with a fierce intellect and a burning desire to uncover the truth about the darkness that Samuel had battled. In 1962, Eleanor, now a prominent member of the Order, stumbled upon a disturbing discovery. While researching ancient texts in the British Library, she found a reference to a forgotten manuscript, hidden away in the archives of a remote monastery in the Carpathian Mountains. The manuscript was said to contain a detailed account of the rituals used by the ancient civilization to seal away the dark entities. Determined to retrieve the manuscript, Eleanor set out for the Carpathians, accompanied by a small team of trusted Order members. The journey was long and arduous, taking them through rugged terrain and isolated villages where the superstitions of the old world still held sway. As they neared the monastery, they could feel a palpable sense of foreboding in the air. The monastery, perched precariously on a cliffside, was a relic of a bygone era. Its stone walls were weathered by centuries of wind and rain, and the air inside was thick with the scent of incense and old parchment. The monks, wary of outsiders, reluctantly allowed Eleanor and her team to access the archives, warning them of the dangers that lay within. After days of searching, Eleanor finally found the manuscript. It was a brittle, ancient tome, bound in leather and covered in strange, cryptic symbols. As she carefully turned the pages, she realized the manuscript contained more than just rituals. It also detailed the history of the dark entities and their influence on the world throughout the ages. One passage, in particular, caught her attention. It spoke of a prophecy, foretelling a time when the seals would weaken once more, and the darkness would rise to engulf the world. According to the manuscript, the only way to permanently defeat the ancient evil was to gather the fragments of an artifact known as the Lightbringer's Amulet, scattered across the globe. Eleanor knew she had to act quickly. She and her team left the monastery, their minds racing with the implications of the prophecy. The Order needed to find the fragments of the amulet and reassemble it before the seals could be broken. Their quest would take them to the far corners of the earth, confronting dangers both ancient and modern. Their first destination was Egypt, where one of the amulet fragments was said to be hidden in the tomb of an ancient pharaoh. The tomb, located deep within the Valley of the Kings, was a labyrinth of tunnels and traps, designed to protect the pharaoh's treasures from grave robbers. Eleanor and her team navigated the treacherous passageways, deciphering hieroglyphs and avoiding deadly pitfalls. Deep within the tomb, they found the fragment, a small, intricately carved piece of crystal, glowing with an inner light. As Eleanor reached out to take it, she felt a surge of power, and the walls of the tomb seemed to tremble. They quickly made their way out, the fragment safely in hand. Their next stop was the Amazon rainforest, where another fragment was hidden in the ruins of an ancient temple. The journey through the dense jungle was fraught with danger, from venomous creatures to treacherous terrain. They finally reached the temple, a majestic structure covered in vines and moss, its stone walls adorned with carvings depicting scenes of ritual and sacrifice. Inside the temple, they encountered a series of puzzles and traps designed to protect the amulet fragment. Using their combined knowledge and skills, Eleanor and her team navigated the challenges, finally reaching the inner sanctum where the fragment lay. As they took the piece, they felt the same surge of power, a reminder of the amulet's significance. With 2 fragments in hand, they continued their quest, traveling to the icy wastes of Antarctica, the bustling markets of Istanbul, and the remote highlands of Scotland. Each location presented its own unique challenges and dangers, but Eleanor's determination never wavered. She knew the stakes were too high, failure was not an option. As they gathered the final fragment, the amulet began to resonate with a powerful energy. Eleanor could feel its power coursing through her, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. But their journey was far from over. They had to perform the ritual to activate the amulet and strengthen the seals, a process that would require them to return to the crypt in Beaumont Hamel, the very place where Samuel had faced the ancient evil decades before. Returning to Beaumont Hamel was a haunting experience for Eleanor. The village, still scarred by the war, had a ghostly, abandoned quality to it. The crater and the crypt lay as they had for years, untouched and undisturbed. As they descended into the crypt, Eleanor felt a chilling sense of déjà vu, as if Samuel's spirit was guiding her. In the heart of the crypt, they prepared for the ritual. The amulet, now whole, glowed with a brilliant light, illuminating the ancient carvings and symbols on the walls. Eleanor and her team began the incantation, their voices echoing through the chamber. The air grew thick with energy, and the ground trembled as the power of the amulet surged through the crypt. As the ritual reached its climax, a dark figure emerged from the shadows, the same entity that had confronted Samuel all those years ago. Its eyes blazed with fury, and its voice boomed through the crypt. "You cannot stop me," it roared. "The darkness will consume all." Eleanor stood her ground, the amulet's light shining brightly in her hands. "We will stop you," she declared. "The light will prevail." With a final surge of power, the amulet unleashed a brilliant beam of light, enveloping the dark figure. The crypt shook violently, and the walls seemed to pulse with energy. The entity screamed, its form disintegrating in the blinding light, and then there was silence. The ritual was complete. The seals were reinforced, and the ancient evil was once again banished to the depths of the earth. Eleanor and her team emerged from the crypt, exhausted but triumphant. They had succeeded where so many had failed, protecting the world from a darkness that few even knew existed. As the years passed, the Order of the Lightbringers continued their vigilance, always watching, always ready to confront the darkness should it rise again. Eleanor Bishop became a revered figure within the Order, her bravery and determination inspiring future generations to carry on the fight. And though the world moved on, filled with new challenges and conflicts, the story of Samuel Collins and the ancient evil he had fought against lived on. It was a reminder that the battle between light and darkness was eternal, and that even in the darkest of times, there were those who would stand against the shadows, keeping the light alive. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed at peace, Eleanor would often visit Samuel's grave, reflecting on the legacy of the man who had first faced the darkness. She knew that as long as there were people willing to fight for the light, there was always hope, a fragile, precious hope that must be protected at all costs. And so, the eternal struggle continued, a dance between light and darkness, each side pushing and pulling in an unending cycle. But as long as the Order of the Lightbringers stood vigilant, the world could rest a little easier, knowing that there were those who would always be ready to confront the ancient evil, keeping it at bay, and ensuring that the light would never be extinguished. Decades passed, and the world changed in ways Samuel Collins could never have imagined. Yet, the Order of the Lightbringers remained a steadfast guardian against the darkness, ever watchful and prepared to confront the ancient evil should it stir once more. Their ranks swelled with new generations of dedicated members, each trained in the secrets and rituals needed to protect the fragile seals holding the malevolent entities at bay. Eleanor Bishop, now an elder within the Order, had seen many battles and faced countless threats. Her hair had turned silver, and her steps had slowed, but her resolve remained unshaken. She had dedicated her life to continuing Samuel's mission, and her efforts had not been in vain. The world was safer, the seals stronger, and the knowledge of the ancient evil well guarded. One crisp autumn evening, Eleanor received a letter, delivered by a young recruit with wide, earnest eyes. The letter bore the seal of the Order and contained news that both heartened and saddened her. A new threat had emerged, a dark force seeking to weaken the seals once more. Eleanor knew her time had come to pass the torch to the next generation. Gathering her strength, she called a meeting of the Order. In the grand hall, filled with the echoes of past victories and the weight of their solemn duty, Eleanor addressed the assembled members. She spoke of Samuel Collins, of their shared battles, and of the enduring struggle against the darkness. "We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us," she said, her voice strong and clear. Samuel Collins dedicated his life to protecting the world from the ancient evil. It is our duty to continue his legacy, to ensure that the light never fades. As she spoke, she handed the amulet, the Lightbringer's amulet, to a young woman named Clara Reynolds. Clara, with her keen mind and fierce determination, had already proven herself in numerous missions. She accepted the amulet with reverence, understanding the weight of the responsibility placed upon her. "Guard this with your life," Eleanor instructed. "The seals must remain strong. The darkness must never be allowed to rise again." Clara nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I will not fail you, Eleanor. I will protect the light." With the passing of the amulet, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. She had done her part, and now it was time for others to carry on the fight. The Order would continue to stand vigilant, a beacon of hope against the encroaching shadows. As the seasons turned and the years rolled on, the Order of the Lightbringers remained a silent guardian, ever watchful, ever ready. The world, blissfully unaware of the ancient evil lurking beneath its surface, carried on with its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and tragedies. And in a quiet corner of a forgotten battlefield, a lone grave marker stood as a testament to the bravery of one man who had faced the darkness and lit the way for those who followed. Samuel Collins' legacy lived on, not just in the hearts and minds of the Order, but in every dawn that broke over a world kept safe by their tireless vigilance. The eternal struggle between light and darkness continued, but as long as there were those willing to stand against the shadows, the light would endure. For even in the darkest of times, hope remained, a fragile, precious hope that burned brightly in the hearts of those who fought to protect it. As the years continued to pass, the Order of the Lightbringers faced many trials, each new generation rising to the challenge with unwavering courage. Clara Reynolds, now a seasoned leader within the Order, upheld the legacy of Samuel Collins and Eleanor Bishop, guiding her comrades with wisdom and determination. In the year 2024, a formidable threat emerged that tested the Order like never before. The ancient evil, having found new followers who sought to harness its dark power, began to break free from its subterranean prison. The seals, weakened by decades of conflict and dark rituals, teetered on the brink of collapse. Clara knew that this battle would be the most crucial yet, a final stand that would determine the fate of humanity. Gathering her most trusted allies, Clara led an expedition to the original crypt in Beaumont Hamel, where Samuel Collins had first faced the ancient evil. The village, now a desolate and eerie ruin, seemed to hold its breath as the team descended into the depths of the crypt. The air was thick with a palpable sense of impending doom, and shadows danced along the walls, whispering forgotten secrets. In the heart of the crypt, the central seal flickered with a dim, unstable light. Clara and her team worked swiftly, chanting the ancient incantations and reinforcing the protective symbols. The amulet in Clara's hands glowed with a fierce intensity, resonating with the very essence of the light they sought to protect. As they neared the completion of the ritual, the air grew colder, and the ground beneath them trembled. The dark entity, more powerful and desperate than ever, materialized before them, its form a swirling mass of shadow and malice. Its voice echoed through the crypt, filled with rage and hunger. "You cannot defeat me," it roared. "I will consume your world and plunge it into eternal darkness." Clara stood firm, the amulet's light blazing like a beacon in the darkness. "We are the light bringers," she declared, her voice steady and resolute. "We will not let you prevail." With a final surge of energy, Clara and her team channeled the amulet's power into the seal. The light grew blinding, pushing back the shadows and enveloping the crypt in a radiant glow. The dark entity shrieked, its form disintegrating in the searing light, and then, with a final, ear-splitting roar, it was gone. The ground settled, and the oppressive energy lifted. The seals were restored, stronger than ever, and the ancient evil was once again banished to the depths of the earth. Clara and her team emerged from the crypt, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of the battle fought and won. Standing at the entrance of the crypt, Clara looked out over the desolate landscape, her mind filled with the memories of those who had come before her. Samuel Collins, Eleanor Bishop, and countless others had given everything to protect the world from the darkness. Their legacy was one of bravery, sacrifice, and unwavering hope. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Clara felt a sense of profound peace. The eternal struggle between light and darkness would continue, but the order of the Lightbringers would always be there, standing vigilant against the shadows. With renewed determination, Clara turned to her team. "We have won this battle, but the fight is never over. We must remain ever watchful, ever ready. For as long as we stand together, the light will never fade." And so, the Order of the Lightbringers continued their timeless mission, guardians of a world that moved forward, unaware of the ancient evil held at bay by their vigilance. The light endured, a beacon of hope shining through the darkness, ensuring that even in the darkest of times, there would always be those who stood ready to protect the fragile, precious hope that burned within the hearts of humanity.